I'm going to I'll briefly introduce you to my background and why I'm here talking about Martyn's Law now. We'll take a look at what it is, including the three parts, and then I'll briefly recap the four questions that you saw before you registered, and then we'll come to the to your questions, and hopefully I'll have some answers for you. So as Lauren's already said, my name is Jodie Reed. I'm a specialist in compliance software consultancy and training. I've actually spent the past 25 years working in this world, typically helping companies to implement recognisable management systems, things like ISO 9001 for quality, 14001 for environment, and of particular relevance to today, things like 45001 for health and safety, 27001 for information security, and 22301 for business continuity. For anybody that wants to connect with me after this session, you're very welcome to do so. I've popped my LinkedIn details in the chat. My business is Penarth Management. I've been working in that, like I say, for the past 25 years. But it was probably about 3 years ago that I read the Manchester Public Inquiry and realised that there were so many missed opportunities as far as the good systems that we know about. And I've been working in conjunction with various other like-minded organisations, and together we formed the Protect Alliance, and we're running a number of these events on a regular basis. So just to recap then, I said that my interest in this started on the back of reading the Manchester Public Inquiry. And if you remember back to the 22nd of May 2017, it was quite horrific. There were 14,000 people, men, women and children, that had gone to the concert to watch Ariana Grande. But what should have been a fantastic night out ended in tragedy at 22:31 when a lone attacker detonated his bomb, killing 22 people outright, changing many other lives forever. And tragically, about 18 months later, the mother of one of those victims, she went out to a theatre not far from the arena in the first place, and she was shocked because she was all set to carry a small lightweight bag, prepared for it to be searched, and it wasn't. And she was shocked because nothing had changed in terms of the safety and security standards. That lady is Fegan Murray, and she is the mother of Martyn, who, like I say, was one of the 22 casualties on the night. She campaigned tirelessly, and she's the reason that as of this year, the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act 2025 was enacted, more commonly known as Martyn's Law. It was enacted on the 3rd of April 2025. It won't, however, be enforceable for at least 2 years. But that doesn't stop us preparing for it. So let's take a look at what the legislation says. So part 1 looks at public protection requirements. In here, one of the first things we need to do is to decide, are your premises in scope? So qualifying premises, this is wording now taken directly from the legislation. So qualifying premises will consist of a building or group of buildings and other land. So in the example in the picture that I've chosen, we've got a pub and the pub garden. It could be a university campus and multiple buildings or various other things, but you get the idea. And it should be wholly or mainly used for one or more purposes specified in Schedule 1, and we'll come on to what those premises are shortly. And what you'll see when we do cover that Schedule 1 is that all of the premises defined have something in common in terms of publicly accessible locations. And they will be qualifying if it is reasonable to expect that there may be 200 or more people present at any given point in time. So 200 is one of the measures. Just before we take a look at numbers in full, bear in mind that premises can be contained in other premises. And so to illustrate that, I've chosen shops. So in a shopping mall, like the example in the image shown here, you might have many individual shop units that could contain over 200 people. But then the overall mall will also come into being, and there are rules around that. So let's take a look at the different tiers. So at 200, we've got what is the standard tier. So that's the first stage at which there are some additional requirements. Now, I do want to confirm that although there are no additional requirements at under 200 people, it doesn't take away from the fact that in my experience, most organisations are already not meeting those requirements. So that's why I've included that number on here. But in terms of what's new for Martyn's Law, like I say, we've got 200 to 799 people will count as standard duty premises. And then once you've got somewhere that has over 800 people, they will class as being enhanced duty premises. And you've also got qualifying events. But you'll notice here, I've only got one box shown. And that's because qualifying events will only apply if they have more than 800 people. So if it's less than 800 people, it's not a qualifying event. But there's quite a few other rules around what constitutes a qualifying event. So this will be things like the premises at which the event is to be held consist of a building, other land, or a building and other land. Premises are not enhanced duty premises. In other words, I tend to think of this as being top trumps. If it's already classed as being enhanced premises, you will not need to register separately for the event. Members of the public will have access to the premises for the purpose of attending the event. So remember, it's that mindset of publicly accessible locations. Part D, we've already mentioned that it's reasonably expectable to expect more than 800 people. Part E we'll come back to in a moment because this seems to be one of the most controversial parts of this particular clause. So measures will be in place to secure or check members of the public who wish to access the event. And so the next slide will cover that in more detail again. But there's a final piece, and that's about there are some exemptions. So a qualifying event is not a qualifying event at a place of worship, childcare, school or college. Does that introduce some loopholes? Potentially, yes. And so too, I said we'd come back and look at Part E in more detail. Interestingly, I'm a member of the Martyn's Law Forum on LinkedIn, and there's been some interesting discussion, and this is something that seems to be tripping people up. And so here it's about will members of the public have access to the premises for attending the event. Now here it says have paid to do so, but there are separate fact sheets and guidance issued by the government that confirm that of course free of charge events will still be in scope. Have the tickets or passes and are members of guests or club. But is this bit about the check-in that they have the permission to access? Now, the reason that this is potentially controversial is that all the while this has been going through Parliament, there have been various events, things like the Christmas market in Germany, New Orleans, and more recently the event in Liverpool. All of those things, you automatically start to think of Martyn's Law, but actually the legislation wouldn't have applied. So there are going to be some gaps in the short term. But one of the things that we'll find is that this is being monitored. Okay, so let's take a look at what premises are in scope. We'll go through these quite quickly. The got them in matches the sequence they're shown in Schedule 1 of the actual legislation. So the first one is shops, etc. So think retail, but not necessarily just things in a shopping mall like this. It could even include things like garden centres, for instance. Food and drink. Now this is only applying not to takeaways, so this is sit down type environments. Entertainment and leisure activities. Now I've put the leisure in orange there because originally there was the intention that that was going to be a whole separate category, and under leisure, against the draft legislation, they'd listed all sorts of things, including boxing matches. I'm thinking darts, I'm thinking all sorts of things. But now anything and everything from cinemas and theatres and all those other things come under this category. We've got our sports grounds, so your stadia, your typical examples there. We've got libraries, museums and galleries. Those make perhaps a bit more sense than this rather unhelpful word of halls. But in here, typically you're thinking conference halls or community halls. Visitor attractions. I know we've had on some of our own webinars, we've got stately homes and all sorts of things coming under visitor attractions. Hotels, etc. We've got places of worship. Now, if you remember, places of worship were exempt from events, and they also have some anomalies in terms of even if they have over 800 people, they will still be treated as standard tier premises. We'll take a look at a few more examples where that will apply elsewhere as well. We've got healthcare. So yes, NHS premises will be in scope too. Then we have transport hubs, bus stations and aerodromes. Not quite sure why aerodrome's got its own special listing, but it has. We've got childcare, which just like places of worship, that is to be treated as standard tier regardless of the upper number. So too have our schools and colleges. Now, this is an interesting one when you think of the proliferation of knife crime that's around at the moment and the age group concerned. But colleges are currently going to be treated as standard tier, whereas universities, if there are over 800 people, they will be treated as exactly as you would expect. And then last but not least, I've got in public authorities. So the example I've used here is a town hall in the northwest of England. So those are the premises that are going to be in scope. So now we know what premises are in scope, we need to think about what organisations will actually need to do. Firstly, there will have to be somebody responsible for the qualifying premises or the events. And again, this wording is taken directly from the legislation. So the person responsible for the qualifying premises is the person who has control of the premises in connection with their Schedule 1 use. So if you've got a stadium, it would be whoever is responsible for that stadium. And the person responsible for qualifying events is the person who will have control of the premises at that event. So if taking that same stadium example, if you're running a concert, it's still the person with control over the premises. But some might need to be a designated senior individual. So sometimes the organisation is designated as the responsible person, and that will particularly be the case for something like universities, for instance. So it is going to be important that that designated senior individual has a level of authority and is able to make decisions. Okay, moving forward, something else that the legislation calls for is public protection procedures. And it's got a stated objective, and I've put in orange here a word that we're going to come back, or a phrase that we're going to come back and revisit, so far as reasonably practicable. Now, I think on the call today we've got a number of people who are health and safety practitioners, so this isn't going to be a new phrase to you, but we are going to revisit it in just a moment, because I think it's quite important that we understand exactly what that means. But the stated objective is, so far as reasonably practicable, we need to reduce the risk of physical harm being caused if an act of terrorism were to occur at the premises, at the event, or in the immediate vicinity. It goes on to say that this needs to be followed by people working at the premises or at the event. And there's four key words or phrases. So I've highlighted those in orange here. So everybody that has qualifying premises or events will need to do this. They will need to have processes for evacuating people, for moving, or something that you may hear more frequently now is evacuating people, for preventing people entering or leaving the premises or the event, so going into lockdown, and providing information to people, so communicate. Now, in case you prefer things on a more visual basis, I've just put those four key phrases there. But like I say, that applies regardless of whether you're going to be a standard tier or enhanced tier premise or event. And the stated, we've seen the stated objective already, to reduce the risk of physical harm. But what do I mean by so far as is reasonably practicable? I think this is really important, because if we go back in time, anybody that's working with health and safety will be well versed with the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act of 1974. But the phrase goes back further. In a case, Edwards versus the National Coal Board of 1949, unfortunately, Mr. Edwards, who was working for the National Coal Board, died after a supporting structure gave way. The National Coal Board had argued that it was too expensive to shore up all of the structures, and Judge Asquith, who was the judge presiding over the case, he said it was reasonably practicable is a much narrower term than physically possible, and implied for risk assessment. So although the word risk assessment isn't specifically mentioned at the standard tier, to me, when you dig into what does so far as is reasonably practicable mean, there is very much that implied need for risk assessment. So when we come back to look at these public protection procedures, we might be having things like procedures, we might be having qualified people in place providing ongoing training. And in case anybody's wondering what training is available, there's already free training available via Protect UK, some really good free online training, lasts about 45 minutes or so. But carrying on with the images, we've got things like making sure people are trained in floor plans and emergency evacuation, for instance. And as a slight aside, last year I was doing an exhibition in Cardiff, and the night before I was actually presenting, I ended up changing my slides because I went to a restaurant, and as we were finishing our meal, the young server came over to us and she said, "Oh, the stairs that you came up, they're not available anymore. There's been an acid attack outside." Now, she learnt from her manager that night that we needed to go out a different way. But she'd been working for the company for 7 weeks at that stage. She'd never had any proper induction training, no evacuation training. We were lucky. This wasn't a major deal on the night. But when I shared that story at the time, many more people came forward and said, "Oh yes, my young son's just started a job, but he's had no training either." So there are some real basics, things that should already not be costing a lot of money to get right, including thinking about emergency first aid provision as well. So everybody should be doing at least that. Then, when we move on to look at the enhanced duty premises and our qualifying events, so all of these now, we're talking of large numbers of people, 800 plus. The responsible person, which remember could be an organisation, must assess and keep under review the public protection measures that are appropriate to further the objectives in terms of reducing the risk of physical harm in the event of a terrorist attack. And, we've got that phrase again, so far as is reasonably practicable, ensure that such measures are in place in addition to the mandatory public protection measures of the evacuate, lockdown, and communication. So in addition to those, there might need to be other things. So the objectives for the enhanced tier are slightly different. Here, we're trying to reduce the vulnerability of premises or events to acts of terrorism, and to reduce the risk of physical harm being caused to individuals if such an act were to occur at the premises, at the events, or within the vicinity of the premises or event. So, what can people do? There's a need for monitoring of premises. Again, this is going to be risk-based, so it will be based on what your own site-specific, event-specific risk assessments tell you. But these are all things that would typically come into being. So there will be a need to monitor, and the types of monitoring might include things like CCTV, surveillance, all that good stuff, being prepared to report signs of suspicious behaviour. If we think back to Manchester, people had missed the attacker doing his hostile reconnaissance on the night. Only one member of the public voiced their concern, and then the security guard was wary of sharing that information or escalating it because he was scared of being branded a racist. So we need to be able to not only have the monitoring, but also have the confidence that people are trained and confident in terms of escalating those things. Other examples, we've then got things like movement of people into, out of, within the premises or the event. So you might have access cards, you might have biometrics, you could have for large crowds of people, it might be tickets. But when you're looking at this number of people, that is all something to consider. There's physical safety and security. Now, here I've given you the example of barriers, which might be to stop people. It might be, depending on the nature of the premises or the event, you might be trying to prevent a vehicle as a weapon attack, for instance. Again, depending on the nature of the event, it may be appropriate to introduce other things like protective glass. There's all sorts of things that can be considered. And probably a lot of those things won't massively surprise you so far. But something that I think the traditional safety and physical security people have overlooked in the past is the importance of security of information in relation to these types of things. And so that is also key here. There are examples of a recent teenager trying to start an attack at an Isle of Wight festival, all cyber related. But it's also one of the reasons that you'll see later on there's changes in legislation regarding site plans. There's going to be a certain there's going to need to be a high level one for the authorities, but a less detailed one for members of the public. So there's all sorts of things to think about, and it will be very much risk based. In terms of documenting compliance, it's not going to be good enough to just do these things. Obviously, we need to be able to demonstrate that we've done it. And there is a requirement that the responsible person must ensure that a document is prepared and kept up to date. So it doesn't just sit there. It needs to be a live document, but there needs to be a statement of the public protection measures in place, an assessment of how those procedures may be expected to reduce the risk. So we keep coming back to this risk assessment terminology. A statement of the measures in place, or indeed proposed to be put in place, an assessment of how they may be expected to reduce vulnerability and risk, and such further information as the Secretary of State may specify. Now, we are actually waiting. One of the reasons we've got to wait 2 years is we're waiting for additional guidance to come in terms of what this will look like. And something that we can't do anything about at the moment, must provide information to the Security Industry Authority, who have been named as the regulator, as soon as possible after it is prepared or revised. Like I say, I can't tell you what that looks like yet because the associated guidance is not yet available. What I can tell you though is that if you have more than one responsible person for qualifying premises or events, so think back to the analogy of that shopping centre that I showed you. They must, so far as is reasonably practicable, coordinate with one another. So if you've got a shopping centre manager and hundreds of shops inside, there will need to be some communication and cooperation between them so that these things are managed properly. Okay, in terms of the regulator, I've already mentioned that's going to be the Security Industry Authority, or SIA if you prefer. What the legislation does tell us so far is that a person who, and bear in mind that could be the organisation if that person is a university, for instance. So the person who becomes or ceases to be responsible for qualifying premises or the event must notify the SIA. And although I don't know the answers to these yet, I can tell you that there will be guidelines about what the timescales are. So there will be a required time frame. It will require specified information in a specified format and in a specified manner. But what that looks like at the moment, I don't know. It would make sense for it to be online, but I can't even tell you that at this point in time. What I can tell you is my interpretation of the role of the regulator. And essentially, I see that role as being twofold. On one hand, it's to be supportive and provide guidance. And on the other, it will be investigating and enforcing. So if we take a look at those two different sides, the regulator is going to have to prepare guidance about how it proposes to exercise its functions. So there shouldn't be any hidden surprises in there. Not only should they provide, will it need to provide guidance, it will also need to provide advice about the requirements. And written into the legislation, it will need to keep review of the effectiveness of those requirements in terms of reducing the physical risk of harm to individuals arising from acts of terrorism and the vulnerability of enhanced duty premises and qualifying events to terrorism. So that's on the supportive side. If we look at the enforcement side, the SIA will have the power to investigate for the purposes of assessing compliance with requirements. Now, having worked in the world of compliance for a long time, I know through experience that when I go into an organisation for the first time and audit them against any of the standards, particularly those that have legal requirements, I have never, ever, ever, in 25 years of doing this, never found anybody that would be entirely compliant with existing legislation just yet, because very often they don't know what they don't know, and if they haven't got a system, then they struggle to demonstrate it. So in terms of things that people can already be doing, they can already be starting to make sure that their compliance systems are robust. Because if they're not, or if the regulator cannot find the evidence of that, the regulator will have the ability to take enforcement action. Now, we know the enforcement actions could involve compliance notices, restriction notices, penalty notices, financial penalties. The details of that, I think, will come out more thoroughly once once we get the guidance from the SIA. Okay, so we've spent the biggest part of the session so far on part one. What's left now? Parts 2 and 3 get progressively shorter. Part 2 deals with licensing, disclosure of plans of premises. And what actually happens here is that the Licensing Act from 2003 and the Licensing Scotland Act of 2005 are due to be amended. So these deal, if I just deal with the 2003 Act, that's to deal that deals with all the regulated licensable activities, things like the sale by retail of alcohol, supply of alcohol in a club setting, provision of certain regulated entertainment, provision of late night refreshments, all that kind of stuff. So so there's an amendment to that, and you'll see that it's going to be a legal requirement that all new licence applicants applying for premises licence in England, Wales and Scotland will have to supply 2 different copies of their plans to the local licensing authority. There will need to be a detailed one for the authority themselves and a less detailed one for public use. Going back a little way, I said one of the things to take into account is what information is already in the public domain in terms of information security. And when I've been researching things here, it's surprising that sometimes that information isn't even being leaked from your own premises. I have actually found very comprehensive floor plans for buildings on local government sites. So there's quite a lot of things that people can do. It's worth just Googling your organisation and seeing what you can find. It's quite amazing when you dig. So that was part 2. Part 3 is even shorter. So the regulations are what we've already looked at. The extent relates to the fact that this is going to apply through England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Commencement we know is going to be a couple of years away, and the short title we saw right at the beginning, the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act 2025. So in terms of recapping, when you signed up for this webinar, you were signing up to find out why it's been introduced. Hopefully you've got a better understanding of that and of what the law requires. When will it be enforceable? We know that's not for another couple of years. And there's been some ideas of things that organisations can already be doing to prepare. Now, what I've got next is a slide for any questions. I don't know if we've had any questions coming in. I do have some pre-prepared ones that have cropped up elsewhere, but if I just stop sharing for a moment, Lauren, perhaps I can check with you whether we've got any questions in from the audience.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we have had a few through. So we'll go through them. So the first one is, what are the requirements for below 200 people? This question came in quite early into your presentation.
Okay, so below 200, there is no change to the current legislation. However, when we think of when we think of some of the things that have happened, the 200 is kind of an artificial number. It's there to more than anything, I think help the legislation get pushed through. If I go back to that restaurant setting in Cardiff last year, there were probably less than 50 of us in that restaurant. But had we have left that and ended up in amongst that acid attack scene, that would have been a much bigger problem. So I would encourage people to still review the processes they've got in place, because they are still legally required to carry out a risk assessment. In fact, that plays quite nicely into one of the pre-prepared questions I've got as well, Lauren. I'll come on to that one afterwards.
Yeah, great. And then this next one kind of sort of links onto that one. So I'll pick this one up now. So someone's asked, how are the numbers decided of the less than 200 and then the 200 to 799 and then the greater than 800?
Okay, so these numbers were battered around in Parliament quite extensively. The original draft of the legislation was proposing that it would be under it would be 100 and 800, yeah, 100 rather than 200, which would have pulled a lot more organisations into scope. There was an awful lot of pushback, and so it was one of the things that the numbers were amended, but part of what's written into the legislation is these things can be reviewed. So it's not necessarily set in stone forever, but it's very much the starting point. I know that a lot of people would have liked it to have been lower, myself included, but at least we have something to work through.
Thank you. So the next one, oh, it's just someone saying, is it going to be available on the RRSN website? They missed the start. So yes, if you are a member, you'll be able to access the recording of this on our member resource hub after. That's that one answered quickly for you there. Next one, is there any requirements for events not open to the public? For example, a work event in a building with access control?
No, if it's things like serviced office environments would not be in scope. If you've got something where you've just got employees or multiple different businesses inside a serviced office, no, that is not considered to be publicly accessible. So that wouldn't be in scope. Other things that would also not be in scope because they're considered to be private events are things like weddings and funerals, for instance.
Thank you. Next one, someone said, very informative, thanks. You quoted from the legislation several times, but this isn't legislation for a few years. Could you provide links to the documents you are citing, the ones we need to review for preparation? I wonder if there's perhaps something that anything you could send across that I could include with the recording on the member resource hub afterwards, maybe.
Yeah, so although it's not yet enforceable, the act is there, but there is already supporting guidance. So I can send through the links afterwards, Lauren. But for anybody that wants to look it up for themselves, if they do a search for fact sheets on the government website, they will find fact sheets, and there's different fact sheets relating to premises, to events, for calculating numbers. There's a few of them, and I expect that list to grow over time as well.
Yeah, thank you. Next one, for a venue within the enhanced band, would the responsible person be expected to be an on-site manager, or could someone remote fill the role?
That I don't know the answer to yet, and that's something I think will be fleshed out during the when the new guidance comes out. Um, my suspicion is that it's likely to need to be somebody that's based on premises, but I don't know. That is one of those things. Until the guidance comes out, there is no definitive answer.
Yeah. The next one, someone's just confirming what they've heard. So they've said, if I've heard correctly, our private events such as weddings won't fall into scope, which is what you've
Correct.
just, yeah.
Yes, correct.
Next one is, what are the expectations for staff training under the law, if there are any?
Well, there's already requirements, already existing legislation that requires staff to be trained, so that doesn't change. Disappointingly, there isn't within the Act itself. There isn't any real coverage in terms of training. What you will find though is in some of the fact sheets. There's more information about that, and there is an expectation that there will be training. So, and there is already, like I say, Protect UK have free. It's called ACT, Action Counters Terrorism. Those training sessions, typically 45 minutes, completely free and really worthwhile watching. Um, and there is a brand new qualification in the process of being developed at the moment as well. It will not be mandatory, but it will be a level 3 qualification. It's currently being developed by NACTSO, and is expected to be available for delivery, I think, in the early 2026.
Great, thank you. So the next one's a long one, so you'll have to bear with me whilst I read this one. I have a question regarding education establishments. We currently audit for policies and procedures in terms of anti-terrorism and Martyn's Law Prep. What is the stance on displays showing actions on for staff, e.g. teachers, teacher assistants, etc.? Is it going to grow so this is mandatory under the law, bearing in mind some schools choose not to display this to avoid inciting panic, etc.?
I think I missed the bit about they have to display information for the staff. Was that, Lauren?
Yeah, so there's like, what is the stance on displays showing actions on for staff, for example, teachers and teacher assistants, etc.?
Well, when I think back to the fact that the Act requires communication, my gut reaction to that is it's going to be better to have it available and rehearsed. Something that I think, again, this is another reason I think training is really important. It's one thing to have these measures in place, but to know that to make sure the muscle memory kicks in the event of an emergency, you want to be practicing these things. So I think if you're not going to display it, then your team needs to be so well practiced at doing these things that would be the only reason for not having it available.
Thank you. Hopefully that answers your question. Next one is the responsible person role is interesting. Do we know anything about what competency they will need or what responsibility they hold in the organisation?
Sadly, there is no more information on that. I think there might be a fact sheet, but it doesn't say much more than what we've already looked at. Again, I'm expecting more guidance. But I think it's fair to assume they will be a senior person. I would envisage that there are people in existing compliance roles that would likely be ideal candidates for taking on some of that, but it must be somebody with senior management authority within the organisation.
Yeah, thank you. And that's all the questions we've got for now. I mean, we've still got a little bit of time if you wanted to go through some of your example ones, and then if any more come up, we can perhaps do another check-in at the end, if that works.
That's okay. Let me go back here then, because we're used to getting some of these questions, and I think this first one will help with one of the ones that's already cropped up. So the first one I've got for you is this question, real question. And it was, given that hostile actors are unlikely to wait for 2 years, what are the ramifications of premises and events organisers not doing anything now? And I think that basically sums up the don't wait. Because this person was absolutely right. You know, your attackers are not going to wait and to only go after the soft targets at that stage. And not only that, we mustn't forget that we already have legal responsibilities. And for instance, we have the Occupiers Liability Act, as amended, which imposes a duty of care by the occupier of the premises or the land towards the reasonable safety of visitors and others at the premises. So again, it comes back to the all-important risk management piece. The next one I've got, it's a little bit interactive, this one. So Lauren's going to run a poll for us in a moment, and this will be a good test for how well you've all been listening. The question for you is, our cathedral is going to be hosting a concert, and we expect to attract over 1,200 people. They will be paying to attend. Is this a qualifying event? Yes or no? And I've put this in here because it's been a genuine question that's cropped up and caught people out on webinars. Once we've got your votes, we should be able to see what those are. How are the votes going, Lauren?
Yeah, we've got about 10 people left, so I'll give it another few seconds. I can see people are still entering it, and then I'll end it.
Okay, let's see what that looks like. Have we got a split? Ah, caught you out. Is it in scope? No. Earlier on, um, so 92 of you, 92% of you actually said it was in scope, and you would be incorrect. Based on an earlier draft of the legislation, it would have been in scope. But remember, there's two things here. Our places of worship are only ever counted as being standard tier premises. That said, with a larger number of people, if it was a different type of premises, then over 1,200 would. However, I went through some of the exemptions, and this is one of those. This is one of those exemptions that cropped up. So well done to the 8% that got it right. Yes, there is a risk there, and when I highlighted this to a counter-terrorism expert, I know he's actually taken that feedback to the Home Office. But it's an interesting one because that was a question that that came to us and has been well discussed. So that's a slightly tricky one. Another question we've had previously was this one. As a multi-site visitor attraction with 5 fixed venues across the UK, is it a requirement to have a responsible person at each site or for the organisation as a whole? That's a bit like the responsible person question that we've already had. I honestly don't know the answer to that until the subsequent guidance comes out. I've got one more pre-written question for you before I come back to Lauren, see if there's anything else. And this was about calculating numbers. So the question said, are the numbers of 200, 799 and 800 plus actual capacity numbers or flow? So, for example, they went on to specify if 2,000 people were coming and going during the event, but there were less than 800 in the event at any one time. So, there is a fact sheet on calculating numbers. In fact, we've done a webinar on this one previously. But the quick answer to that is it's on the number of people likely to be at the event at any given point in time. So I know, for instance, you might have you might have a gallery and expect a full throughput of 2,000 people in the course of the day, but because you've perhaps given people different time slots, you'll never have more than 700 people at a time. That would then make it if you've got 700 people, you'd then still be in the standard tier, for instance. Lauren, were there any more questions, or shall I move on and share some upcoming events that we've got that we've got?
We've had a couple more come through, actually. Yes. So the first one is current legislation has been mentioned several times, but what legislation is being referred to?
Oh, okay. My apologies. So the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act 2025. I did mention it at the start, but perhaps it was missed by those who came in a little bit later. So the Act it was enacted on the 3rd of April 2025. So Martyn's Law, more formally known as the Terrorism Protection of Premises Act.
Thank you. The next one is, what if it's a place of worship, but it's being used as a conference centre or other functions?
So then it comes back to its Schedule 1 use. What is its main purpose? So if you've got something that's a multi-use facility, you'll come back to its main function. And I think that's one of those things where it will turn out there's going to be loads of premises like that, and where going back to the role of the regulator, I suspect that that's something that they're going to have to help define. They might even have to help decide where that line fits. And a good example, we did a webinar on fire safety, and we looked at I went through some historical fires that would have fallen in scope as far as Martyn's Law type premises. And for anybody as old as me, you may remember a fire at York Minster. I can remember the Blue Peter scheme to design the stained glass window. Um, anyway, that you think of first and foremost as being a place of worship. But actually, when in researching that, what was quite interesting is the number of people visiting it as a tourist attraction. So, which way do you then classify it? When you first look at it, the obvious use is place of worship, but it seems that more people visit it as a tourist attraction. And I don't honestly know how the regulator will interpret that because obviously, if it's classed as being a tourist attraction, it will have more stringent requirements than if it's classed purely as being a place of worship.
Thank you. Yeah, sounds like there's still quite a lot to
Yes.
yeah. Um, and then this is the last one, unless anybody else has any last minute ones. Is the cathedral example in scope for standard duty premises or not in scope at all?
It would be in scope as far as so places of worship with over 200 people will be in scope as a standard tier premise.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all the questions